obscenity, and no last-minute optimism detracts from an audience's fetish for gore. Television dramas depict a world of grit and chaos. Perfect juxtaposition to the 30-second commercial in which the soiled carpet turns spanky clean in seconds flat. The difference for Coetzee, of course, is that the words in this particular novel are hot, as the reader conjures the scene of the execution. The words, enlivened by the reader, ask the reader to participate in the killings by re-enlisting the executioner step by step, as evil's electricity courses through all those complicit in the book. One might begin to defend West from Coetzee's criticism by noting that West regularly writes historical fictions, inserting all sorts of creative anachronisms, doing great violence to history simply because, as West says, history makes for great ransackable material. West wants to create the total novel, a phrase he borrows from Mario Vargas Llosa, where anything can fall into the book, unrespectable things like superstition or taboos. It's all available. Indeed, the fiction writer better than anyone explores the dark areas of history, as the lack of specific information about an event marks the space for writing, as West states. In the mind of the proprietor, all things happen at once. End quote. The proprietor is the owner of one particular vision of history, and his power in that dominion is omnipresent. Which is not to say that West avoids an ethical response to Coetzee's charge about debauched fictions. Not at all. West takes the argument about fiction's tendency to debase much further than writers or artists interested in merely disturbing or unsettling the reader, throwing the cherry bomb essentially under the settled bottoms of readers in certitude. Rather, behind history's most violent endeavors, West sees the ironic work of twisted artists, bad artists, aesthetes of the cruel, but artists all the same. The vein that runs through much of his fiction is that the imagination is not only the means for envisioning ourselves as other than we are, usually as better beings, but it also operates in retrograde. The painter Walter Sickert is fingered as one of the Jack the Ripper figures in West's Women of Whitechapel, while in the novel Tent of Orange Mist, Japanese soldiers gathered inside a brothel in Nanking partake in a highly ritualized, exquisite tea-time ceremony of coprophagy. The retching junior officers embarrass themselves in front of their superiors, who are connoisseurs of the droppings of comfort women, able to discern spices, herbs, and meat in the mix. The conceit, of course, is that men capable of raising the low depths to such ceremony are also capable of aestheticizing all manner of behavior. Such is West's response as well in the depictions of the executions of Hitler's plotters. West seizes on the fact that a film was made of the executions, a film watched by Hitler and friends among bottles of old cognac and the finest cigars. The film itself was shown also to new recruits, though subsequently it was destroyed because of its effects on morale. Too strong for the average young Nazi, but hardly enough to make Hitler queasy. A description of the executioner's dress, his implements, and his methods reveals a deliberately chosen slow and painful hanging by piano wire. West elaborates a bit. He says the executioner smells like celery and mothballs. But the facts around the scene itself do not seem altogether incompatible with West's depiction. And this is again from that one paragraph in the historical record about the executions. West is certainly inside his line, even though at one point West insists the men were hung with hempen cord, not piano wire, and thus the official history lied. There's all too much thought put into the execution, all too much enjoyment of the long, excruciating deaths, too much cognac and cigars. West asserts that any discrete version of these events would be no less shocking than the full depiction, and worse. It would leave out the details which make all the difference when it comes to assessing evil or depravity. Quote, "The novelist must sample truth if he can get it, or quick. To remove such events from history is to view a rosy world that may just not exist." End quote. Going further, West wants to respond to the downward swerve of print literary culture at large by fashioning a response to aesthetic decadence based in the need for writers to exercise their freedoms ever more forcefully. Quote, not only picking up the stink of mothballs and celery from the executioner, but also tracking him home to sausages and dumplings, cuddly kids and torpid Frau, and his habit of talking back to the newspaper, the split heels from diabetes, to pile on detail, to summon down to earth the vision of complexity of contraries in which humans abound, end quote. Coetzee, however, excludes the novelist from the torture chamber precisely when the writer begins to revel in the quality of his imaginings. Artists risk becoming sadists, Coetzee warns, and in this, West ironically agrees. This is precisely why West argues that writers should never censor and exclude, because they can be almost as sadistic as executioners. West writes finally that you start out to denounce horror, yet in the end accept it for its own sake, because it reveals the license of creative power. So long as men are vile, so art can be too, maybe even after. We've moved a long way from rubbing mustard on the belly. Mustard is just the peculiar anodyne that we ignore. Take it or leave it. Fiction, though, should exercise all its powers more forcefully than ever before.
My piece is a little bit different than the ones that people have done before. It's more as a field report from a handless handyman. Wait till this warms up a bit. I'm not one of those who believes that fiction has any necessarily curative properties, but the project that I'm going to describe in a moment or two was an attempt to use an artifactual fiction to bring about a recovery, which I'll be discussing in just a second. Field report from a handless handyman. But who is this Paul West, I wondered? Even though I had known him for years, had taken several workshops with him, corresponded with him for a while, and had thrown myself into more than a few of the maelstroms he had diabolically placed in my way as I struggled towards writing fiction, the devilish irony and downright cruelty of Paul's stroke, which seemed to overwrite the news of the stroke itself. That is to say, the silence that irony and cruelty revealed seemed to erase what I had known of him. In 2003, he suffered a debilitating stroke that robbed him, the wordsmith, the man built of language, of words and language. So I began to wonder how I could respond to such an event, perhaps even help him out of this mental lockjaw. I had heard of this partner, Diane Ackerman, was working arduously with all sorts of specialists and on her own to help him back into the world of language, out of the silence he had fallen into. But nothing occurred to me that might do any good until one day, while reading one of his essays, I stumbled upon what I thought might be a particularly effective method for helping him recover from his stroke. I read in the piece that as a youngster, Paul's interest in everything aerodynamic enabled him to identify at a glance any plane flying overhead, especially a useful skill for a young lad in wartime Britain. And it's a skill he's retained to this day, by the way. His home in Ithaca lies directly beneath the flight path to the local airport, and while sitting in his backyard or exercising in the pool, he turns his head skyward each time a plane passes, calling out its make and model with unerring accuracy. That's uncanny, I said to him earlier this week over a tide of, or an earthquake, or an eruption of egg salad sandwiches. Especially all you've been through, I can't hardly believe it. It's child's play, he answered, beaming. And in fact, it was child's play, or child's work, rather, that had caught my eye in the essay I just mentioned. In addition to remarking on his youthful skills as an aircraft spotter, he also mentioned, almost as an aside, that one of his greatest achievements before turning to writing had come when, as a boy of 13 or 14, a plan for a flying model plane